I'm Christy Bishop, and welcome to What Nobody Tells Us. Today's episode is about a full and total mind-body transformation. Now, I don't know one person in my entire life, I'm 44 years old, that has not questioned how they look, questioned how they feel, questioned how they think, or wish they could change something, anything, for whatever reason, to be stronger, to be fittier, to fittier, to be stronger, to be fitter, to be prettier, to be more handsome, to be more appealing to others. But a lot of times it's not about being healthier. Today's guest is Jared Sklar. If you are a Beachbody or now Body fan, you would know him at Sklartacus. You may be one of his many, many, many cycling class fans, the rabid fans who love him so much and his motivational story. And I'm thrilled to have Jared on the show today. He has an incredible story about how he transformed his entire life from an injury. And he used to be over 300 pounds with a really negative mindset and a lot of self-sabotage. And he got hurt one day, ironically, being active, and was forced into the world of cycling. And I use the word forced on purpose because very begrudgingly, and he will tell the whole story. Jared is so inspirational. He's so poignant and thoughtful in the way that he describes a lot of personal details around his journey and around his transformation. And now he's an Ironman. He's a triathlete. He literally lives and breathes cycling and helping other people through their transformations, which is something he never, ever necessarily envisioned for himself. But it just goes to show that the world throws what you need at you when you need it and gives you the opportunity, and it's up to you to take it and run. So I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. A really important note, there are no trigger warnings in here. There's nothing about eating disorders. There's nothing necessarily about body dysmorphia. But this is also not an episode where there's a preachy message about you have to get healthy and you have to eat perfect and you have to lose weight and your body has to look a certain way. This is not that at all. This is about finding and becoming your best self and finding the journey that gets you there and keeps you there. And Jared outlines a lot of different strategies that you can use in everyday life to start your own transformation, no matter how long it takes and no matter what it looks like, because everyone is different. Everyone is beautiful in their own way. And whatever your journey is, I hope that you can find some inspiration and motivation from my conversation with Jared. So please enjoy. Hi, Jared. Great to see you.
I'm so glad to be here. I've really been looking forward to this.
Thank you. Me too. Welcome to What Nobody Tells Us. Your story is absolutely incredible, and I can't wait to share it with everybody. And just our pre-calls have been so inspiring, and I know that your story is going to change a lot of people's lives, just like it changed your own. So let's dive in. Before we get into like the real good meat of like what inspired your story, talk a little bit about your childhood. What was your relationship and education with like food and fitness growing up?
Yeah, it's actually really interesting. So my entire weight, at least the way I sort of viewed myself is overweight, right? Like basically my entire life, although I was very active in, team sports growing up, I played baseball and hockey and like pretty much all the way up until high school. I was always like the bigger guy. And so never really paid attention to nutrition. It was just, I grew up in the Midwest. So if lunch wasn't like a burger and fries, it was basically a salad if it was anything else. So at least for me, I never really paid attention to nutrition growing up, and so it wasn't until over the last couple of years that I really started to pay attention to health and fitness and really pay attention to, I guess, how my body responded to eating a little bit more healthy and paying attention to what I was putting into my body a little bit more.
So, okay. So what inspired, like what was the trigger for the entire transformation? Like I find this beginning of the story so incredible.
Yeah. So, like I sort of mentioned, I was overweight and out of shape, even though I was playing all these, pickup sports, team sports. And so
Yeah.
I moved out to LA about 9 years ago, and I was in this flag football league. And that was basically the only thing that I was doing to stay active, right? Other than that, I was, pretty much on the couch all the time. And so
Mhm.
was in
Wait,
this
how much
flag
did
football
you
league.
weigh, if you don't mind me asking? Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt.
I was about 300 pounds at the time.
300 pounds. And how tall are you?
I'm 6'2". I think that like body image is a real thing, right? Like my entire
Yeah.
life, I viewed myself as super out of shape and overweight. But it's funny because like other people, when I ask other people what they thought or like what their view of me was, like they always, everybody says I was a bigger guy, but like it wasn't until after the transformation that people really, I guess, outwardly said like how much weight I guess I had to lose. But anyway,
Yeah.
I digress. So I was in
Yeah.
this flag football league, and this one week, it was like a really competitive game and like really intense. And I go out for this pass, and I like made a cut, and I immediately felt a huge jolt go down the back of my leg.
Ugh.
And playing sports as long as I did, I was like, man, like I know that this is not going to be good, and I knew it was my hamstring. Like so basically, I limped off the field, and being like the sort of, I was always sort of like this doubter's mindset where I was like, oh, it'll be okay. I'll just like rub some dirt on it and it'll be okay, right? And so take a couple plays off, end up finishing the game. And over that next week, I was just like, this is not very good. But
Mhm.
I was in this doubter's mindset. So I was like, you know what? I'll go out next week and hopefully it'll be better. And so basically week after week, it got progressively worse and worse and worse. And eventually it got so bad that I was like, you know what? I got to go to the doctor. I just got to suck it up and see what he has to say. So I walk into the doctor's office. I limp into the doctor's office basically. And immediately he confirmed what I was thinking was happening and basically said that I had pulled my hamstring really bad and that I had to take some time off of football and basically rest for the next like probably month or so. Otherwise, there's no way this thing was going to get better.
Mhm.
So I was really upset, and there was a part of my mind that was like, I'm just going to go out and play football anyway because it's like the one thing that I love to do outside of
Yeah.
whatever. So as I was like heading out the door, I was literally like about to head out. He stopped me and he said, Jared, have you ever tried cycling before? And my gut reaction, and I think like a lot of people have this sort of like idea in their head of what cyclists look like, right? Like it's the people
Mhm.
who are like taking up the whole lane, decked out in neon spandex, like making you late for whatever you're in the rush for, right? And so my mind immediately went to that, and I was like, internally, I was like, hell no, I've never tried cycling, but outwardly, I was like, no, I've never tried it. So that, or like the dancey choreographed like thing, that was like what my vision of cycling was.
So it
And
was
so
not a particularly positive perception of cycling. It's not something that you at 300 pounds envision yourself doing. Very, very different than like interactive flag football with your friends.
exactly.
Yeah.
So my gut reaction was like, you'd never catch me dead on one of these damn things. But he was like, like, listen, like if you want to get back on the football field, if you want to heal quicker, there's
Mhm.
no better way than cycling because it's low impact and it'll help you, sort of recover and strengthen your soft tissue that you've essentially torn or over the last, couple of weeks of like repetitive movement and not giving it yourself a break. So it was like, listen, go sit on a bike, go to the gym, sit on a bike for 45 minutes a day, 5-6 days a week, and return to me after a month, and we'll see what we can do from there. So I was a member of LA Fitness at the time, and although I like obviously had never gone, there was an LA Fitness that was like a couple blocks from me. Never gone, but I knew like from my like sort of like orientation, I don't know if that's like the right word, but like my first visit there,
Yeah.
they had taken me like on like a site visit, and I knew that there was a cycling room in the gym. And
Mhm.
so I was like, okay, like I know that I have to go here 5-6 days a week. And so I checked the cycling schedule, for the group cycling classes, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna listen to my doctor, but there's no chance in hell that I'm gonna take one of these freaking classes. So I look up the schedule and I basically made my schedule around the group cycling schedule where I was going to go when nobody was there because you couldn't catch me dead in one of these things. Like I was almost embarrassed, right? Like that's
Yeah.
where my mindset was, right?
Yeah.
And so I go there, and when there's no classes going on, the lights are off in the group cycling room, and I go to like the far corner of the room, so like wearing like a hoodie and long. So like I basically like put my hood up when I was on the bike, right? So like nobody would be able to recognize me. I'm like,
Like you're
whatever.
invisible in the dark in the
In
cycling room in
the
the
dark,
corner.
all black, like, in the corner. If somebody was to walk into that room, they'd be like, "What the heck is this dude
They
doing?"
leave immediately.
Yeah,
Like bye.
probably like creeper like in the
Yes.
back of this room. Anyway, long story short, I put my headphones in. I'm sitting on this bike, and 45 minutes go by, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I'm just like pedaling along, pedaling along.
Mhm.
And so, basically, I repeated this sort of thing 4, 5, 6 days a week for the next month. And
Mhm.
as I spend more time just sitting on the bike, I'm like, you know what? If I'm going to be here anyway, I might as well like put together like a custom playlist, right?
Mhm.
So like I like one of my other things other than flag football at the time that like really sparked joy in my day-to-day life outside of work was I love going to music festivals,
Mhm.
right? So like EDM, like, basically putting together these playlists, like, really became fun for me. And so I would just go show up to the gym, nobody else in this room, and I would just be like throwing my own little party basically for 45 minutes, right? And so after the month, I continue this process for a month,
Mhm.
and I start to become like more engaged about it, right? Like it wasn't something that I was like dreading. It became something that I would kind of like look forward to.
Okay.
And so I go to my doctor after this month, and not only had my hamstring healed itself essentially, but I had lost 20 pounds over that
Mm.
1 month. And so basically I'd felt the best that I had felt probably since high school, right? Like I'd lost this weight, and not only from a physical, the physical benefits, but all of a sudden, like all these like negative, when you're that big, and at least in my situation, like I had
Mhm.
so many negative thoughts. Anytime a bad situation would arise, like it was immediately the worst possible situation that would happen, right? And so all of a sudden, like I have an outlet to like channel that into, and
Mhm.
my mental health was just like so much better, and I just felt so much better in my day-to-day life, right? So so I lost 20 pounds, and essentially from my doctor's point of view, like I could get back on the football field. I could, I didn't necessarily have to stay on the bike, but I was like, what? I feel the best I've felt in a long time. So I might as well just keep going and see how far I can take this thing essentially.
Yeah. Can I so I want to go back a little bit because like when you think about it in hindsight, it sounds easy. It's like, okay, cool. Well, I was on the football field, I got injured. I really didn't like the idea of cycling, but my doctor said to do it, so I hid in a corner in the dark in my hoodie. But a lot of people who have a lot of weight to lose or even don't have a lot of weight to lose, there's a lot of like self-sabotage or like self-loathing that goes along with that. So like I know it's been a while, but can you take yourself back or take us back to your first few times on that bike? Because I can't imagine it was easy, those first 45 minutes. Like, how did you have the willpower and like what was your thought process to just get through those first few sessions? Because at the end, it's like, yeah, I really like this. Maybe I'll continue. But like, what really got you through those first like humps in the first few weeks?
I think it was just the fact that I wanted to get back on the football field and not be like limping around all over the
Yeah.
place. Like that was what started it.
Yeah.
Um, and then I think also like knowing what was going to get me onto the bike was like creating the playlist and having a good time with it, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're just going through the motions, if you're just sitting on a bike for 45 minutes,
Yeah.
you're going to be bored out of your mind, right? But like finding an avenue that was going to make it fun for me
Hmm.
was what kept me going, at least in that short term. Because like
Yeah.
if I was going to have a good time and like have my little dance party, which is
Yeah.
funny because like that's initially what pushed me away from it. But
Yeah.
like if I was gonna, like have my little party and like kind of like shut the rest of the world out and have that 45 minutes for myself, like
Yeah.
that was what made me excited about coming back day in and day out, at
Got
least
it.
to begin
Yeah.
with.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So then you mentioned your mental state and your mental health. Like, Walk me through a little bit of that evolution, because like physically you lost 20 pounds in a month, and I'm assuming you didn't change your diet too much or at all. But then what types of like epiphanies did you start to have? And like, because you had a big decision to make at the end of those 4 weeks, like what drove that epiphany and the movement?
Yeah, well, I think that, I around that time I did change my diet a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. And when you talk about epiphany, right? So like I did have like a light bulb moment because, at that time I didn't want to put in 45 minutes of work and like be working my ass off on the bike and then
Hmm.
turn around and have a meal that was going to like basically negate everything that I just did, right?
Yeah.
So I had this like light bulb moment where it was around the same time that I started to do this. I went to have lunch one day and I opened up my fridge and there were 4 different pizza boxes from 4 different restaurants in my fridge, like stacking up on top of each other.
Hmm.
And it was that moment that I was like, okay, if I'm going to be working my butt off in the gym 45 minutes a day, I need to be fueling myself properly where I'm not like going to be lethargic the
Yeah.
second that I get off the bike and eat a bunch of pizza. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it was that moment that I got into intermittent fasting, and that's a whole nother thing. But from a mental point of view, it was literally just like my outlet to be able to unplug and like really sort through all the things that I was dealing with on a
Hmm.
day-to-day basis, because we all have those situations where maybe it's a tough conversation, maybe it's something else that we maybe it's a roadblock that we run into in our day-to-day lives where it's we don't really have a way to deal with that, and
Hmm.
cycling became my outlet to sort through those situations that I was dealing with on a day-to-day basis.
So did you have like, let's talk about the diet a little bit, or just, eating plan. I don't love the word diet, but just
Yeah.
nutrition in general. Did you have any prior education or knowledge about kind of how you wanted to change things away from the pizza and like towards intermittent fasting? Like, was it something where you just heard about things that could work, or did you have a lot of education to do to figure out what was going to work best for you?
I had zero education. And to be
Okay.
honest, like a lot of people, I was the guy who every January 1st, I'm like, I'm going to get myself into shape. I'm going to like get like really lock in on this. And then I would fizzle out 2 weeks
Yeah.
later.
Sure.
And that's generous. Really, it was like January 1st to January 5th, probably is like when
Yeah.
I was like going in and then I would fizzle out. Right.
Like a
So,
lot of people. Yeah. Tons of
right.
people.
I had no real education. It was just like what I've been fed on social media, essentially.
Yes.
But what cycling helped me do that I think was the best thing in the long run was it helped me build discipline. Every single day, I knew that I was going to be on the bike for 45 minutes,
Mhm.
5, 6 days a week, right? And so I wanted to build that same discipline when it came to my diet. And
Mhm.
so I'm the type of person where I don't need breakfast every day, but I am the biggest snacker of all time, and that's like just the truth that I know about myself. And especially during that time, I was the person who I would eat dinner and then we watch TV the rest of the night, and I'd be eating ice cream and popcorn. And basically, up until the second I went to bed, I would be snacking on something, right?
Yeah.
And so around that time, intermittent fasting was really popular. And
Yeah.
it still is really popular. So I was like, you know what? If I try to build this same discipline that I'm using in my physical activity, in my diet, or
Mhm.
my eating habits, then it'll translate over time, hopefully just as much as it will on the bike, right?
Right.
So I set my eating window with there's multiple different kinds of intermittent fasting, but the one that I did
Yeah.
was 16/8. And so
Yep.
basically that means that you have an eating window of 8 hours and then you're
Yep.
fasting for the rest of the 16 hours of the day. And
Yep.
so basically from noon to 8, that was my leash to eat whatever I wanted. That's at least the way it first started off.
Yeah.
Then as things sort of evolved and progressed over time, I got into not necessarily like a paleo diet, but that sort of thing, right? Where I was like eating
Mhm.
mostly whole foods. And that's the biggest takeaway that I took on top of the intermittent fasting is just eating more whole foods, less
Mhm.
processed foods, and that's something that I have sort of stuck with over time,
Yeah.
um, because as intermittent fasting is sort of like phased out over over the last couple of years, the one thing that I've really stuck to is trying to eat as many whole foods as possible and sort of
Yeah.
stick. to that like paleo-ish type of diet.
That makes perfect sense because it helps so much and it just keeps you healthy over the long term. So
Mhm.
after those 4 weeks ended, you go back to the doctor and he's like, okay, you lost 20 pounds. So what happens then? What are some of the epiphanies you had at that moment?
Listen, I mean, I think you get to that moment where it's like you lost 20 pounds.
Mhm.
Why do I have to stop? You know what I mean? Like, how far can I take this thing? Just because I don't have to see the doctor doesn't mean that I'm all of a sudden done. You know what I mean? And I'd felt so good after that first month. You don't realize how much energy you're lacking
Yeah.
when you're carrying that much weight until you start to shed some of that weight and like realize like I can bend over. This was the main thing. Like when I was in that period of my life, like every day I would get up to go to work, right? And so the first thing you do in the morning before you head out the door, you go to put your shoes on and put your shoes and socks on, right?
Mhm.
Every day, just this simple act of like bending over to tie my shoes or put my socks on, I
Yeah.
would literally get short of breath in that one little thing. And so,
Yeah.
and that's just one example. Like when you go through that, that's a little subconscious thing every single day before you even step out the door.
Mhm.
I am not in the place that I want to be in, right?
Yeah.
And so you go through that and like you head out the door and it's just like automatically you're starting your day in a hole,
Yeah.
right? So when you start to move in a different direction where, the weight loss is just it's a side effect of all the other things that you're doing, right? All of a sudden when you move in a direction where you're not dealing with that, it's like I never want to go back to that version of myself ever again.
Yeah.
And if I can just stay on this path, if I can, stay with this little bit of discipline, who knows where the next road will take me and who knows what other doors might open up.
Yeah. So where did it take you? How did you do the baby steps of it? Because it's so fascinating to think about, like literally bending over and tying your shoes and starting the day in a hole, like
Yeah.
feeling like you've already lost before you've walked out the door, which is like so powerful and so sad at the
Yeah.
same time that so many people experience. Like, what was the next part of the journey for you? Like, how did you find the willpower to keep going?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, it was just the willpower just because I had, not everybody has that dramatic of a change in 1 month, right?
Yeah,
And I
exactly.
totally recognize that, right? So when I lost the 20 pounds, I was like, crap, like I felt like I was in such a hole.
Yeah.
I was like, you know what, maybe next month I can lose another 20 pounds. It was
Yeah.
literally that quick. And so like over the next 6 months, I had lost 100 pounds just by doing the same things over and over and over again. And yeah, I mean, it was literally like night and day. And it got to a point where, I'd changed jobs around that same period of time. And I had seen one of my old coworkers out in public and I said, "Hey, how's it going?" Whatever, and we're chatting. And
Mhm.
5 minutes into the conversation, she looked me dead in the face and goes, "Jared, is that you?" And I was like, it was like at that moment, it was that time where I was like, okay, I have been putting in all this work. I've found my routine. I found something that I love. And it was at that point where I was like, I am completely unrecognizable compared
Yes.
to where I was, right? And like this was a coworker that it wasn't somebody that I would like see on a day-to-day basis, but once a month, twice a month, whatever. And yeah, it was just at that moment where I was like, okay, like life is different now. Like you
Yeah.
are a different person than you were 6 months ago.
Yeah. So thinking about those 6 months, like that dramatic of a weight loss, like 100 pounds, you literally lost a person off your
Hmm.
body.
Yeah.
What are things that nobody tells you about that type of like very, very significant transformation? And it can be physically, like,
Uh-huh.
again, like the story about tying your shoes when you're severely overweight. That's an embarrassing moment that people don't want to admit necessarily. And everyone has those, but what kind of things that do people not necessarily talk about with those types of transformations?
Yeah, I think that that's number one, right? Like, and and again, like I feel like the main thing is like you don't realize, sure, like you deal with these situations on a day-to-day basis,
Hmm.
but it wasn't until I started to gain a little bit of momentum, until I started to move that boulder, I didn't realize how big of a hole I actually was in.
Mm.
Because although you have this in your mind that like you're dealing with these situations on a day-to-day basis, like it becomes your norm, right?
Yeah.
And so until you start to get a little bit of momentum and you get a little bit of speed and you start to like move in these directions, um, it's hard to understand like where exactly you're at.
Yeah.
The other thing from I guess it's like I guess a little bit of a lighter note. I had to buy so many pairs of damn clothes over
Yeah.
that 6 month period
Yeah.
because you know like you don't know where the bottom is, right? And I don't know if that's the right analogy, right? But like
Well, that
I
makes
didn't
sense. Yeah.
know when I after that first month that I was going to end up losing 100 pounds.
You're
So like
right.
you're like, oh, I lost 20 pounds. I feel great. I need to buy some more clothes. And then
Yes.
the next month comes by and it's like, oh, I lost another 20 pounds. I need to buy even more. So like I guess like a little bit lighter note, but yeah, I think it's just like, and I think this goes with all aspects, right? It could be losing weight, it could be setting another big goal. You never know what your true potential is until you start to move and like start to head in that direction.
Right.
Um, so yeah.
Well, I mean, people talk about like, the time is going to pass anyway. So like 6 months is going to go by anyway. So why not, if you want to start something, start it. You can absolutely be a completely different person physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, intellectually, whatever, within 3, 6 months. And,
Mhm.
a lot of people just are afraid to really get started. What
Yeah.
about some of this is more like personal, but like physically, like people, when they lose that much weight, there's like sagging skin. And then there's a different type of body dysmorphia that comes along with it. Like you may have been thinner and getting in more shape, but like mentally, a lot of people, like you mentioned, and we're here for the deep dark stuff, that's totally fine, it doesn't have to be all sunshine and rainbows, but a lot of people will still be in that mindset of like, I'm larger, or those negative thoughts are still pervasive. Did you
Mhm.
experience any of that, and like if so, how did you overcome it?
That's a great question. I think that I haven't really, I'm trying to think of the best way to answer this question. I think that the fact that I've always had something in front of me since
Mhm.
then
Yeah.
has helped me direct some of that negative attention in a different way, right? So like
Okay.
I've always since I've sort of like started on this path,
Yeah.
I've become very good at like always having another goal in front of me. So it's like always what's the next thing? What like how far can I go? What can I do differently, right? So I mean, in my experience, like there's always going to be those negative thoughts, right? There's always going to be something where, you look at yourself in the mirror and, maybe you want to change XYZ about yourself. But for me, what's really benefited me is like setting the next goal, right? So like I didn't start off this whole thing with losing 100 pounds. It was, can I lose, first off, it was just trying to get back on the football field. And then it
Right.
was, let's lose another 20 pounds and then let's lose, so it's like, and then
Yeah.
once I lost the weight, eventually I was satisfied with, my weight loss and where I was at from that point. Then I got into obviously teaching cycling, and then I got into triathlon, like I talked about earlier. And then, then I became an Ironman, and now I'm like moving into running a little bit more. And now I'm training for an ultra marathon. So it's like,
Yeah.
always keeping something in front of you. There's always, for me, like there's something about having a carrot in front of you that keeps you motivated on a day-to-day basis, because at the end of the day, you're going to lose motivation if you're just doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. It's going to get very repetitive. So
Yes.
for me, like having a big milestone in front of me has kept me motivated, but also like it's it's allowed me to have markers behind me as well, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
it can be very easy, like you mentioned, to be negative the next time you hit a roadblock. But if you turn around and say, you know, I became an Ironman, I lost 100 pounds. Like if you look back and utilize those sort of like um,
It's like milestones almost.
those milestones as
Yeah.
markers of your success,
Yeah.
then all of a sudden you become pretty much like unstoppable. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It's like, look at all these things that I've accomplished. Even if something creeps in your mind that says, oh, you're not good enough in XYZ, you can turn around and be like, I'm a freaking badass. I did all these things. The
Yeah.
next thing is just another roadblock in the way.
And you're basically like, shut up, negative thoughts, get out of here. Like you don't
Yeah.
have any space here.
It's literal proof that you are unstoppable and that you can do hard and very challenging things.
Yeah, and like keep going and
Mhm.
overcome anything. You mentioned
Yeah.
the woman or the previous coworker who didn't recognize you until like 5 minutes in.
Yeah.
As you lost all of that weight, did you find that people started to treat you differently?
That's a good question. I think that I've surrounded myself with like such a good group of friends
Mhm.
and also like my fiance, like having her with me throughout this entire transformation, right? Like I think I have like such a tight knit group that I don't necessarily think that I noticed any of that.
Yeah, and even strangers out in public.
Yeah, not really. I don't know. Maybe I just like maybe I'm like too much like sunshine and daisies with like my mindset now, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I think that the main thing is like I was always negative, right? So like
right.
I would go into situations in a negative way. I would be scrolling on Instagram thinking, "Oh, this person sucks. This person's posting their fitness plan, you
Yeah,
know, and I think that the way that I viewed things was negative compared to the way that like, that other people were treating me, if that
that
makes
makes
sense.
sense. And then you attract that kind of stuff into your life because it's like a
Yeah.
self-fulfilling prophecy. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that
And
makes
also like when you have that mindset where like there's opportunities everywhere, then I think other people react to you differently. People treat you differently when you have a different mindset and a
yes.
different outlook on things.
God, that's so true. It's so true.
Mhm.
It's like the energy around what you put out there is exactly what you attract back 100%.
Mhm.
Okay, so what point in time did you realize that cycling was completely taking your life in a different direction? Because you had to find time for it somehow, and you're doing the desk job that you did not like. So
Mhm.
where did it all change?
You know, it's funny because all these sort of like things in my life, it's been a slow progression into, you know, a specific road that I was going on, right? So, you know, obviously the weight loss went in this direction, and then, you know, I cycling was a big part of that. And so, you know, I have a fear of public speaking. It was
Mhm.
really bad before all this, before this sort of this road that I've been on. But you know, so but at my core, I love helping people, right? Like that's what makes me happiest is
Yeah,
helping other people. And so, you know, in a quote unquote previous life, I was in sales and I was trying to get people onto a specific software or you know whatever I was selling. Like that was I was trying to help people with this tool that I had.
mhm,
Well, when I lost all this weight, my mindset kind of shifted into helping people lose weight and accomplish new goals and things like that. So
mhm,
I had an opportunity to start teaching cycling at the LA Fitness that I was at. I gotta tell you, I was nervous as hell. It's funny because this one of the instructors that was at LA Fitness sort of like nudged me to try to teach, and my first reaction was, "Hell no, I'm not going to get on this bike." But again, fueled by this desire to help other people, I was like, you know what, I'll try it out, right?
yeah,
And so I started teaching at LA Fitness, and I love telling this story because like over the last couple of years, there's been like sort of like where we're talking about mile markers along the way that were like inflection points on whether I was going to go in one direction or whether or not I would go in a completely other direction. And so this is the story of my first class is something that is a story that I absolutely love to tell. As I mentioned earlier, I was terrified of public speaking. And so I get on the calendar for my first class at LA Fitness. It was like a Friday afternoon class at like 5 o'clock or 5:30. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to put together my whole playlist. I'm going to put together my whole class. And because I'm so terrified of public speaking, I'm going to like memorize every lyric of every song. I'm going to know like where we're at in each song. And so the entire week leading up to the class, I was like at the gym memorizing this class. Like I literally would get to work or I would get to the gym before work, like 6 a.m., go through the routine. After work, I would come home. And so this went on for like basically the entire week leading up to the class. I probably put in like, thinking back, at least 15 hours of this one class preparing for this
wow.
one class, right?
How long was the class supposed to be? Like 50 minutes or an hour?
45, 45
45.
minutes. Yeah.
15 makes sense though. You want to be prepared.
Yeah, so I was gonna not mess this up, right? It's my first time, and I'm posting on social media. I'm telling everybody that I know. I'm like, okay, I'm gonna pack the freaking class. Everybody I know is gonna be there.
Yeah.
So Friday comes along, and I like cut work early to go to the gym to like practice even more. And so I set up in the cycling room, and there's at that time, because it wasn't a class going on, there's people filtering in and out, kind of like what I would do, like in the back of the room. And I'm just sitting there like dancing, doing my thing, like preparing for this class, right? So I get there at like 3 o'clock, and the clock starts to tick down. And eventually 5:30 comes around, and the room is completely empty, and nobody had showed up for me. I was like, F, like I had put 20, 25 hours of practicing this one class, and I'm sitting in this damn room by myself, and nobody even showed up.
No.
And like my mood goes from like here to here, right? Like I'm basically depressed. I'm like, this fucking sucks. And by the way, I was making like probably $15 after, maybe not even $15 after taxes for this one class, and I'd put in 25 hours worth of work.
Oh,
I'm doing the math in my head. I'm like, okay, this is like what, 15 cents an hour or whatever.
But the emotional cost was far worse.
Yeah, exactly. And so right as I'm about to pack up, I look over to my left, and like I see this friendly face. It's my best friend Mike, and like you don't know Mike, but he's like the most high energy person I know, and he literally like it's like with like the doors to the room are like this, like
the French doors,
French doors, and so he like high energy busts through the doors, like opens them up. He's like, Jared, let's get after it. I've been looking forward to this all day. And so I go from like almost depressed that like I'm here by myself to like all the way through the roof, excited and stoked that, you know, my friend showed up for me that day. And so,
oh, God bless Mike. Did you do the whole class with Mike?
He did the whole class with me. And by the way, like at the time, like it's funny, I wasn't even certified in cycling at the time. So I didn't know what the hell. I put him through probably the hardest workout I've ever done in my entire life, but he showed up for me. And it's funny, he's actually going to be the best man in my wedding. So like, he's just like, but I think back to these moments over the last couple of years, and, you know, if he wasn't there that day, I probably would quit training and teaching cycling. Who knows? I wouldn't be at that point, right? So like that was just a moment that I always think of. And, you know, as time sort of progressed, you know, obviously I got a little bit more comfortable with, you know, public speaking, and you know, my class sizes started to get a little bit bigger over at LA Fitness. And then COVID happens and everything shut down.
Yeah.
And there was about a year that I didn't teach cycling at all. And I was like, I don't know if I'm ever even going to go back to LA Fitness, because like, you know, it's just at a point that like, whatever. And this
Were
company.
You cycling at home though by yourself? Like, did you have a bike at home at that point in time? Or
I ended up getting into, it's funny because I ended up getting into road cycling, which ended up leading me into triathlon and getting into an Ironman, right? But long story short, I ended up, there was a cycling studio over in Santa Monica that I started teaching at. And then I ended up getting discovered by Body, which, formerly Beachbody.
Yes. Okay. So that story is wild. That you want to talk about another moment of serendipity. Can you tell that story? Like, how did Beachbody come about?
So at the time, you know, I had sort of alluded to this earlier, but, you know, my desk job, I hated being behind a desk. And it was one of these things where I was like, I was in denial for the longest period of time that like I was just not meant for corporate America, basically. So I was in, you know, I was working at this company, and it was still COVID, right? So like we're sort of in this like hybrid environment where, you know, 19 working days out of the month you're at home, and 1 day out of the month you're in the office.
Yeah.
And so it's my 1 day I'm in the office, and I'm sitting there just like bored out of my mind essentially. And lunchtime comes around, and I'm scrolling through Instagram, and you know, I'm opening up the hidden messages section where it's like people who like you're not necessarily friends with, who like slide in your DMs or whatever. And at that time, like, I have maybe a couple hundred followers, maybe 1,000, something like that, whatever. And so at that time, if I get a message from somebody that I don't know, it's somebody trying to sell me like crypto or like scam me out of my entire life savings.
Yeah.
So I'm like deleting. And I come across this message that was interesting. It was from this lady named Angel at Beachbody. And she's like, "Hey, Jared, I came across your Instagram from the other studio that you're working at. I'm Angel from Beachbody. Would love to chat with you about this new platform that we're launching. Would love to potentially have you audition." And so I'm like deleting. And I see this message. I'm like, oh, like this sounds interesting. And so
Mhm.
I respond. I'm like, "Hey, Angel, like, um, I'm at work right now. I have 20 minutes to kill on the way home today. Like,
Yeah.
maybe we can chat today on my way home. I'm going to commute home." And so we set a time. And after that, like between lunch and the end of the day, I'm like, God, I really hope this lady isn't like trying to scam me, right?
Oh,
Like I'm playing like mental gymnastics in my mind. I'm like, this is probably not, it's maybe shady,
yeah.
but maybe it could be a cool opportunity.
You're like,
And
don't say yes on a recorded line.
exactly. And so, long story short, we chat on the way home, and she tells me about this new platform called Body and how they're launching this new platform that's going to be revolutionary. It's going to be awesome, and there's nothing else like it on the market. And
Yeah.
so we set a time to audition. I think it was like 2 days later, and I think like a week after that, she had given me the green light that I got the job. And
Okay.
so,
So, like, that's a little while ago in your life, but I'm so fascinated by the audition process.
yeah.
Like, how did you prepare for that? I'm assuming it was in person or was it remote?
Yeah, so it was in person. So think of like a big film production studio. So think of like
Okay.
a like a news set. So like
Yeah.
there's basically the way Body is. It's like a stage,
Hmm.
and the way it's set up behind you is they project um, different. Anybody who's taking the class live with you has the ability to be on screen behind you, and you can like
Oh, cool.
right. And
Yeah.
so I get this set. By the way, public speaking, like, although I'm like, okay, public speaking in front of a class, this
Yes.
is an entire different animal because there's cameras and cameras
Right.
freak me the hell out. Right. So, like, I'm trying my best to, like, be engaging or whatever. And I'm like doing my practice beforehand. And then I get to set and there's cameras everywhere. And I've never taught in front of a camera before.
Yeah.
It was terrifying. I gotta tell you, it was terrifying. But for whatever reason, like maybe it was my story because like obviously they knew that I had gone through this, but
Yeah.
I feel so lucky every single day that they found me because
Yeah.
like without that conversation, without being at work that day, like if I
Yeah.
was working at home, there's no chance I would have ever taken that phone call because I wouldn't have had the 20 minutes to kill on the way home.
Right.
And auditions were that week, so like if things didn't line up in that specific way, there's no way I would ever be even on this phone call right now. You know what I mean?
That one day in the office with the 20-minute commute home. So this
Exactly.
is another like logistical question I've always wondered because I do a lot of like Peloton. I used to do Beachbody like years ago, but I
Uh-huh.
think about the music and the playlist and just like dropping the beats and the moves and all of it. How do you coordinate that? This has
Yeah.
nothing to do with your story, but logistically, I've always wondered.
Yeah. So for me, it always starts with the music, right? Because and
Yes.
everybody's different, right? Some people start off with, programming and all of that. For me, it starts with the music because that's what got me like to stick with it, right? That's
Yes.
what that's what really piqued my interest was like having your own little party on the bike for 45 minutes and like
Yep.
blocking everything else out. So for me, always starts with putting together like an awesome playlist. And then
Yes.
from there, like I over the years I've grown accustomed to like knowing how to program to certain songs and certain BPMs and things like that.
Hmm.
Uh, so it does come with like a lot of practice and like knowing what each song would would
Yes.
likely format to. But that's kind of how I start things.
But I love that the inside is like music got you to stick with it. So that like emotional component, if I want other people starting where I started to stick with it, I want to give them that hook. I
Right.
love that. I love it.
Yeah.
And then there's the programming element too, of
And for
course.
me, right, like I try to bring a little bit like something different to every class, right? So I'll try to tell like some sort of like motivational story, something that I went through because
Yes.
like when I'm on stage, I try to think about and whether it's on stage or if I'm teaching at Sun Cycle, which is my company,
Yes.
Every time I'm there, I think about where I was 4 years ago, and I try to think about what would have motivated me in that moment to push forward a little bit more, to push a little bit harder. And I try to really put myself in the rider's shoes every single time I get on the bike.
I mean, that's what makes the best instructors, right? Like that's how you can connect the most. So what was the evolution from body to sun cycle? And I'm curious about like you and your persona, and like obviously you had to be a certain type of persona, and all that you got the EDM, instructor, you've got like the heavy metal instructor, you've got the like Zen instructor, but like
Yeah.
what did you want to do to move on and create your own thing? Like how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it really just comes from being authentic. Like
Mhm.
when you're talking about like, the sort of like types of instructors, right?
Yeah,
Like I sort of like what I talked about earlier, like I try to stay true to my roots and like remember where I came from
yeah,
and the sort of like the progression over time. So like I just try to be as motivational as possible and like I said earlier, tell stories that, of difficult times that I went through to
mhm,
hopefully get the rider thinking about maybe a difficult time that they went through that they overcame that they can utilize as ammunition as they go into the next sprint or next interval and things like that. So,
yeah,
but sort of on that same topic, right? Like I was doing body and my full time job at the same time,
yeah,
and it just got to a point where I had to be real with myself and realize my 9 to 5 was not bringing me joy, right?
yeah,
It was not filling my cup. It wasn't like I wasn't able to help people in the same realm or same capacity that I was whenever I got on the bike. So like
yeah.
this little seed had been planted over time. And eventually I was just like, and body had sort of given me the confidence to say, you know, I can do this on my own. I don't have to have this other thing that's like in my mind, although it's like paying the bills, it's not
Mhm.
filling me up in here, right?
Yeah,
Like it's not filling
exactly.
me up inside. So,
It's not your
you know,
purpose.
yeah, it's not giving me purpose, right? So about a year ago, I took the leap and started the Sun Cycle. And for those who are listening who don't know what the Sun Cycle is, it's a cycling studio right on the beach, right on the sand in Santa Monica.
Amazing.
And so we bring the bikes out every day, and it really is an experience that is unlike anything else, right? Like being on the beach, and in the morning we see dolphins, in the evenings during the sunset we see killer sunsets, and it's just like when there's like that perfect sunset and you're just like sweating your butt off and just in that vibe that you feel like you're everything is clicking, you're just working as hard as you can, and you're just like in that zone where you're unstoppable. There is absolutely nothing like that moment, and I just every single day I just never take it for granted how incredible not only the community is, and how how encouraging and motivating everybody is towards each other, but just the fact that body gave me the courage to be able to take this leap and explore this as a full-time thing instead of just teaching
Yeah.
classes part-time.
What are some of, well, first of all, congratulations. That's huge to take
Yeah.
that leap and to be successful doing it and to basically create something that's not just like a physical experience, but almost a spiritual experience for people. When
Hmm.
you're doing it out in that element, the grounding element of the sand and the dolphins and the sunset, we're so lucky
Yeah.
to live here. But talk about your community a little bit and like what story, because obviously you feel like your purpose is to help people and to overcome the challenges and the transformation that you've done. But what
Mhm.
type of extraordinary stories have you gotten from your community that you've now seen?
Yeah. I mean, you hear all the time with stories of people who, lose 20, 30 pounds. And that's a feather in the cap. But I think it's really the, the sort of like the mental hurdles that people have been able to cross over that
Mhm.
really is the most touching. And this one lady was telling me, this was probably about 3, 4 months ago. She was going through, um, a tough relationship,
Yeah.
and basically she was just telling me that like being able to have this 45 minutes to really like filter through things and process things
Yeah.
helped her relationship and move on from a relationship that was um tough to say the least.
Yeah, sure.
So, just like being able to, like, I always say, like, during my classes, it's the bike is a training ground for life, right? So like everything when you're on the bike is in your control. You have your in control of how fast you're going, how slow you're going, how much resistance you have, how much effort you're putting into it.
Mhm.
And when you at the end of the day, I can coach you on like where to be in the class, but at the end of the day, you have to be the one that pedals the bike, right? And so being able to overcome those situations in class hopefully better prepares you for the situations that happen outside of class. And so
Yeah.
that one story is just sort of like an example that comes to mind. But it really is the what happens outside of class. Weight loss is just it just happens, right? But
Yeah.
it's about like going through the day to day and being able to be more equipped when you get a curveball thrown your way. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Absolutely. I love that the bike is a training ground for life. I love
Mm-hmm.
that. That's a wonderful quote and just such a great
Mm-hmm.
sentiment. Have you seen it within your community and like your loyal followers and attendees? Like, early on, we talked about your mental state changing and your perspective changing, and therefore your energy changed. Have you
Mm-hmm.
seen improvements like from somebody who comes the very first time and then sticks with it? Have you seen differences in the way that they show up?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's funny because cycling, if you're new to cycling and very similar to my story, you can have a certain sort of like vision or idea of what cycling is. And so
Mhm.
it can look very intimidating, right?
Mhm.
Like the first time you show up to a cycling class, like not only just setting up the bike correctly, but if you walk by, we're right there on the beach. So we're in a very public space. If
Yes.
you see a bunch of people, everybody's hustling, moving their butts and like working really hard, it can be very intimidating for somebody who's brand new. And
Yes.
so seeing people transform from this is my first time on the bike, I'm a little bit nervous about how this is going to go. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden being so consistent to, showing up on a daily, weekly basis and having that self-confidence. It's like, those are the things that I think of when I think of like transformations. Right. And so, I mean, you
Yeah.
see that all the time where, people are newer to cycling and then they become like religious about it. And then it's become a part of their life. Right. And then, like I said, it sort of like bleeds into their daily day life where they have more confidence, where they can do all these different things.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, we
Mm.
have a few minutes left, but I wanted to touch on your Ironman training and your triathlons and like ultra marathoning. My God.
Yeah.
So how did that come about? Like when did you decide, that's my next goal. Triathlons are my next goal. Ultra marathoning is my next goal. And what is that like?
I think I actually I'm going to take it back a little bit farther, right?
Sure.
So I started this trend of, losing, I lost the 20 pounds and then I lost eventually to 100 pounds. I started working out. This sort of transformation started in it was May of 2019. 6 months later is October-ish of 2019. I lost the 100 pounds. I was sort of at this inflection point. I was like, okay, I can either, stay on this route or, I don't really have a big goal in front of me. I don't really know what's next. Right. Around that time, I had found out, I had gotten a phone call from my dad. He had gone to the doctor and, basically he dropped on me that he had to get quadruple bypass surgery. Um, he had found out, he had like just left the doctor and he had told me about this and caught me completely off guard. I was just like on in my day-to-day life. Basically told me that like the next week he was going in for surgery. Totally out of left field. And again, like he wasn't necessarily an active person. He didn't necessarily pay attention to diet and things like that. And basically, like it got to a point where he had to get the surgery. And so I fly back, and and by the way, everything ended up being okay. The surgery ended up being successful, and he actually changed his life, his diet and his activity levels in the long run as well. But which is awesome. But going back, I'm from Michigan originally, so I flew back and seeing him in the hospital was a moment that like it was terrifying because like it came out of left field. It was so unexpected, and seeing him go through that, like I have a family history of men on my dad's side of the family basically having heart issues at a very early age. My uncle passed away at, I think it was 39, from heart complications. So I'm in the hospital and I see my dad in this situation. I'm thinking about, my uncle who had passed away at a young age. At the time, I think I was 29. Standing there in the hospital, I was just thinking, like, I just lost 100 pounds, but if I don't stay on this path, if I don't keep this moving, this could be me in 10 years, realistically. You know what I mean? Like, and so, like, it was at that moment that I was like, I need to make sure that I keep this train moving and I stay on this path. And so it was at that moment that I was like, that I sort of started to create this idea in my mind that I need to keep moving on to the next thing. I need to have something else in front of me that's going to motivate me to keep this thing going. So it was very shortly after that I had signed up for my first triathlon, which was the Malibu Olympic triathlon right here in Malibu. And long story short, I had signed up for a half Ironman, and then COVID happened, which ended up, like I said, sort of like being a blessing in disguise. My half Ironman got pushed out an extra year. So I was sort of at this point, like, thinking back, like, again, like I keep going back to this mindset where I need to do something a little bit more. I need to go a little bit farther. I need to keep challenging myself. And so whereas I had 3 to 4 months to train for this race, all of a sudden I had a 15 months. And so I was like, you know what? I think I can do a full Ironman. And
So
so,
what is an Ironman? What are the
yeah,
the quantify that?
a full Ironman, for those who don't know, it's a 2.4 mile swim, followed by 112 miles on the bike, followed by a marathon, all in succession. So it's 140.6 miles total. Um,
Oh my God.
and so the idea in my mind, I'm like, okay, if I think that I can do half of it, if I thought I could do half of that distance in 4 months,
Yeah,
what does 17 months look like? Like, could I do this? And it's funny
right.
because I asked my now fiance at the time, we were taking our dog for a walk. I was like, I think I can do this Ironman. Like, would you support me in like this training? I know it's going to be
Yeah,
a lot. Neither of us had an idea of what the heck I was asking her in that moment because
I
it was
can
a,
only imagine. I have
but
no idea what that takes. It's got to be crazy.
yeah, it was basically like taking another full-time job.
Yeah,
But that next year of training, like, once I like, it was so fulfilling in the long run. Like, crossing that finish line was a moment that I will literally never forget. I was just bawling my eyes out,
oh,
um, hugging my fiance. It was just like, I'm
oh my God.
like tearing up right now thinking about that. But
Yeah.
um
Like
but
what were you feeling in the moment? Like as you did that?
I'm like almost like tearing up right now. It was like you don't, it's hard to quantify because, like, when you're training for something like that, you're out alone by yourself so much. You're out riding in the middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
running in the middle of nowhere. And, all I just keep thinking to myself is like, number one, like, I can't wait to be at the finish line. But, knowing that my fiance was there for me throughout the entire process, like, I'm out biking, I'm like, I just can't wait to get back home so I can, like, hang out with her and my dog. You know what I mean? So it's like, but just having her be my cheerleader throughout that process and, like, finally getting to that finish line, like, in like, you start to, as you get a little bit closer and a little bit closer, you start to envision what that finish line is going to
Mhm.
look like for you. And then race day comes and it's getting a little bit closer and a little bit closer. And luckily, so the race was in Mexico. And so my fiance and a couple of my friends were there. My friend Mike was there with me as well, the one from the
Yes.
from
Of course he
like,
was.
yeah. And
Oh,
so the way it's set up is like it's 3 laps around the island and 3 laps for the marathon. And on the third lap, one of my buddies, my friend Mike and my friend Rob, I see them and they said, the next time I see you, you're going to be an Ironman. And I literally, like, it was that moment. It was like, oh my god, that was like the pre-waterworks. And then I crossed the finish line and I see my fiance, and, like, just like actually getting to that point that I had envisioned day in and day out, every day for the year leading up to that, um, was just an experience that I'll never forget. Like, I will always cherish that moment. And um, yeah, it was incredible. So anybody, like, but the thing is, like, that was my bar that I set for myself. That was my big goal. Everybody has their own individual goal, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody set like big things for themselves. And so that was my thing. That story could very well be getting another job. That's, you know what I mean? So like everybody has their own version of that.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, that was just, it was an experience that I'll never forget.
So two final questions. What is next for you?
Yep. So now I'm training for an ultra marathon. So I have like a warm up, so very similar to the story where I signed up for the half Ironman and then did the full Ironman. I have my first trail ultra marathon. It's going to be a 50K
Okay.
next month, which is August 19th.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh.
that's up in it's up in like the Calabasas area. It's called
Uh-huh.
Bulldog. And
Yep.
then in January, I'm doing the 50 mile run on Catalina, which is about like 7,000 feet of elevation gain over 50
Oh my
miles.
God. But so gorgeous in every possible way.
Yes, absolutely. So,
Okay, so last question, which I'm trying to ask to everybody. So it's like if you think about you years ago, like but right at the beginning of this journey, and you're playing flag football and you get hurt, you get this news, and if there's somebody out there in a very similar situation and who is like, well, this is awesome, the story is great, Jared, wow, holy cow, I could never do an ultra marathon. I could only dream of doing a half marathon or even a 5K. Like, what are the things that nobody tells us about that? But what do you want to tell them?
yeah, I'd say that whenever you're uncomfortable, that can be the biggest springboard to growth on the other side. If you think about these stories I've told you, like it's always been at a point where it could have gone two different ways. And like in the case of my injury, right? Like most of the time when you get an injury, it's seen as a negative thing. It can knock you back. When in my case, it was a springboard forward, or COVID making me not be able to teach cycling for a year. And in fact, it ended up springboarding me into Ironman. So anytime you're dealing with a situation, or if you think there's a roadblock in front of you, if you take a different path, it can knock you on the path of a journey of way more success and way more opportunity than you could have originally thought.
I love that. That is such a beautiful, beautiful thought. Oh, I have so enjoyed this. What an incredible story and transformation. There's just so much more success in your future. And just like your energy is amazing. I'm so excited for you guys to get married. Like just there's so much great stuff to come. I just want to thank you so much for being part of this and being so open with your story. It's been amazing.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute blast. And yeah, this is so much fun.
Thank you. If people wanted to reach out and chat with you, where can they hit you up? Slide in your DMs.
Well, number one, you can ride with me at the Sun Cycle right on Santa Monica Beach. It's thesuncycle.com if you want to visit our schedule. But if you want to reach out to me directly, you can find me at Sklartacus on Instagram. That's SKLARTACUS.
Love it. Oh, I have a feeling you're gonna get hit up with questions about your story. Awesome. Thanks so much, Jared.
Thank you so much.
Well, that's it. Another episode of What Nobody Tells Us. I hope you learned something. I hope you felt something. And I hope you feel empowered to go start a conversation with somebody who you know might be going through something that you don't understand. Lean in. Don't peace out. Thanks so much for spending some of your day with me today. I really, really love that you did that. If you want to reach out, if you got an idea for an episode, you just want to give me some feedback or just say, hey, do so at Nobody Tells Us on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter, or X, whatever we're calling it these days. No one knows. Reach out, Christy at nobodytellsus.com. Shoot me an email there or visit my website, www.nobodytellsus.com. Until next time, see you later.